This happened many years ago, back when I was a foolish kid, too curious for my own good. My cousins, C and K, lived in a remote village deep in the heart of Malaysia, surrounded by dense rainforests and rivers that ran thick with the muddy waters of the monsoon season. Our families visited each other often, navigating narrow, winding paths through the jungle, the air thick with the scent of wet earth, frangipani, and something darker, something the elders never spoke about openly. C was my age, and K was 5 years younger. Like my sister, J together, we were the big sisters, 13 to 14 years old, feeling untouchable in the way kids do before they understand the true weight of their actions. It was the tail end of the rainy season, and the sky was a constant, brooding gray, the sun a distant memory. In their village, where the jungle pressed in on all sides, the night was ruled by shadows and whispers, and every rustle in the undergrowth was enough to send shivers down your spine. The village elders often spoke of the Pontianak, the vengeful spirit of a woman who died during childbirth, or the Hantatetek, a terrifying creature that smothered its victims with its massive breasts. But to us kids, these were just ghost stories, tales meant to keep us in line. Their house was a traditional wooden rumah panggung, raised high on stilts to avoid the flooding that came with the heavy rains. The air underneath was damp and cool, filled with the musty smell of moss and the earthy scent of the jungle. C and K slept in a room at the back of the house, where the light barely penetrated, and the darkness seemed to have a life of its own. One evening, as the rain drummed relentlessly against the roof of nipple leaves, one of us, probably me, suggested we try a séance. The idea was a mix of boredom and a desire to prove our bravery. I had heard tales of the spirits that roamed the jungle at night, but I didn't believe in them. Not really. So, when everyone looked to me to lead, I didn't hesitate. We gathered in the back room, where the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and old, faded incense. We lit a single kerosene lamp, its weak, flickering light casting long shadows that twisted and shifted like they were alive. The floor beneath us was cool, and the walls seemed to close in around us, the darkness pressing down like a heavy, suffocating blanket. We needed to decide who to contact. The idea of summoning a Datuk, a guardian spirit of the land, was tossed around. But no, we wanted something more dangerous, more thrilling. King Tut, we joked. It was absurd, but we didn't care. We were kids, invincible in our ignorance. We formed a circle, hands clasped tightly, and I began to chant. The words felt strange on my tongue, a mix of half-remembered incantations and pure invention. As the minutes passed, the laughter faded, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Then, in the corner of the room, something began to take shape. It was small, hunched over, glowing with a sickly, greenish-blue light like the willow, the wisps that were said to lead travelers astray in the deep jungle. It looked like a child, but its features were distorted, twisted as if by some ancient curse. Its skin was a mottled gray, stretched tight over bones that jutted out like jagged rocks. Its eyes were empty black pits, voids that seemed to suck in the light around them. We sat there, frozen in terror, as the figure slowly raised its head, its gaze locking onto us. The jungle outside fell silent, as if the very earth was holding its breath. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my spine, cold and clammy. Then, without warning, I felt the two fingers, cold as death, sharp as the claws of a harimo, jabbing into my ribs with a force that took my breath away. It wasn't just a poke. It felt like those fingers were trying to pierce through my flesh, to dig deep into my body. I screamed, the sound tearing through the heavy silence, and the figure in the corner let out a low, guttural moan before dissolving into a swirling mist that filled the room with the stench of rotting flesh. One of my cousins scrambled to the light switch, flicking it on, but the harsh light did nothing to banish the terror that gripped us. Our parents rushed in, their faces pale, demanding to know what had happened. We just shook our heads, too scared to tell them the truth. We mumbled something about hearing a noise, and they scolded us for letting our imaginations run wild. But the bruise on my side, deep in purple, told a different story. I could still feel the icy touch of those fingers, long after the lights were turned back on, long after we had tried to convince ourselves it was all in our heads. I vowed then and there to never mess with seances again, but fate had other plans. A few months later, during the dry season, our cousins visited us. We lived in a similar room of Pangung, surrounded by paddy fields and patches of dense jungle that seemed to stretch on forever. The air was thick with the smell of ripe durians and the distant smoke from burning rice husks. C and K were eager to try another seance, this time in our house. I refused, but they wouldn't let it go until I gave in. We went to my room, where the wooden walls were adorned with old batik hangings and charms meant to ward off evil spirits. We lit another candle and sat on the floor, the flickering light casting long shadows that seemed to shift and move on their own. The room felt wrong, like it was holding its breath, waiting. We debated who to summon, and when one of them suggested Adolf Hitler, I snapped. I didn't want anything to do with that kind of evil. We settled on Abe Lincoln, thinking him safe, someone who wouldn't bring the darkness with him. We clasped hands again, and I started the chant. The room grew colder, the candle flame sputtering as if struggling against an unseen force. I asked for a sign, something small, like 2 knocks. The knocks came, but they were not small. They were loud, booming, like fists pounding on a hollow coffin. They came from the tanga leading to the crawl space, where we stored old things, forgotten and gathering dust. The sound reverberated through the room, shaking the walls and sending a shower of dust down from the ceiling. I lost it. I broke the circle and shouted for whatever was there to leave us alone. My cousins looked at me with wide eyes, but I didn't care. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I wanted no part of it. That night, after our cousins left, Jay and I went to bed. We had twin beds, one on each side of the room. Above each bed was a shadow box filled with our favorite trinket ceramic animals, old dolls, small books. Sometime after midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of heavy footsteps on a wooden floor. They weren't the light, careful steps of my father checking on us. These were heavy, deliberate, like someone wearing old rubber sandals that had soaked up the blood and grime of 100 years. The room was freezing, the air so cold I could see my breath. My skin prickled with fear as I heard the footsteps move closer, each one sending a shiver down my spine. I was too terrified to move, to even breathe. The footsteps stopped beside my bed, and I felt a weight pressing down on me, like something was leaning over me. I could hear the contents of my shadow box being moved, the small figurines clattering against each other. Then it moved to Jay's bed, and I heard the same sounds, as if whatever it was searching for something. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would go away, but the smell hit me a stench of rot and decay, like something long dead, dragged from the depths of the jungle. It was overwhelming, suffocating. Finally, the weight lifted, and the footsteps retreated, disappearing into the dark. I lay there, drenched in sweat, too scared to move. When I finally found the courage to open my eyes, the room was still, the air heavy with the remnants of that foul odor. In the morning, Jay accused me of messing with her shadow box. Everything was overturned, just like in mine. I told her what had happened, and her face went pale. We were both terrified, and we swore never to play with seances again. A few weeks later, the guilt gnawing at me, I confessed to my mother. She was furious. Of course, in our culture, the spirits are not to be trifled with. She told me I had invited something dark into our lives, something that didn't belong. I never touched a seance board again. The spirits, once disturbed, do not easily go back to their rest. Some lessons are learned the hard way, and I've carried this one with me ever since. If you don't know what you're doing, don't mess with it. The things that come through may be more real, more dangerous than you ever imagined.